When I saw Nate sitting alone at the bar, it was like I was looking at a stranger and an old friend at the same time. He still had that relaxed, easygoing look, the one that had gotten us both through countless stressful college nights. But there was something different now, a weight in his gaze that hadn't been there before. As I approached, he glanced up, and a slow smile broke across his face. "Jamie," he said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth, and we clinked glasses. Sitting there, I was suddenly filled with memories of late nights, reckless ideas, and too many inside jokes to count. It felt strangely comfortable, even though years had passed. We picked up as though we hadn't spent all that time apart, catching up on stories, sharing laughs, and slowly peeling back the layers that distance had added. At one point, as we laughed about some old prank he'd pulled, I caught him looking at me, really looking, and something in his gaze made my stomach twist unexpectedly. I shrugged it off, blaming the nostalgia and the few drinks we'd already shared. But as the evening wore on, those lingering glances continued, each one stirring something that I couldn't quite put a name to. "So," he finally said, leaning in close, his voice lower than before, "why did we lose touch, Jamie? I mean, we were practically brothers back then." I hesitated, feeling an odd vulnerability settle between us. "Life, I guess," I replied, shrugging, though I knew that wasn't the whole truth. We'd both had our reasons that had kept us apart, and maybe some reasons we'd never fully acknowledged. The air around us grew heavier as we continued to talk, the words slowly fading to quieter confessions, little glimpses into the men we'd become. At one point, Nate reached across the small table, his fingers brushing mine, and a jolt ran through me. It was subtle, maybe even accidental, but I could feel my heart start to pound. The night pressed on, and we moved from the bar to a quieter corner of the lounge, where we could speak more freely. He asked questions that dug deeper than surface-level updates, each one bringing us closer to a place I hadn't thought we'd go. There was something raw, something unsaid building between us, and with each passing minute, it became harder to ignore. As we settled into our secluded corner, the noise of the bar faded into the background. Nate's gaze lingered on me in a way that made the air feel charged, like there was some silent admission hanging between us, something neither of us was willing to speak yet unable to ignore. "It's weird, you know," he said, swirling his drink, watching the ice clink against the glass. "I didn't expect tonight to feel like this." "Like what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though my heart was racing. Like no time has passed. And yet somehow, everything feels different," he replied, his eyes lifting to meet mine. The intensity in his gaze made me feel both seen and vulnerable, like he was looking right through the version of me that everyone else knew, straight into the parts I usually kept hidden. I took a sip of my drink to steady myself, feeling the warmth of the alcohol, or maybe just the intensity of his stare, spread through me. "Yeah, I get what you mean," I managed, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. A comfortable silence settled over us, broken only by the ambient hum of the bar and the quiet clinks of our glasses. Nate leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his fingers drummed lightly on the table, betraying a hint of nervous energy. I wanted to say something, to ask him what he was thinking, but every question that came to mind felt too direct, too vulnerable. And so, we sat there, each of us waiting for the other to break the silence. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently back then?" I froze, caught off guard by the question. My mind raced as I searched for an answer that would somehow manage to convey everything I felt without giving too much away. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "But I try not to dwell on the past. It's complicated." He nodded, a small, wistful smile crossing his face. "Yeah, I guess it is." His hand rested on the table, fingers brushing against mine, and though it was the slightest of touches, it felt like a spark, something undeniable and electric. The tension between us seemed to grow with each passing second, and I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I looked away, suddenly very aware of how close we were sitting, of the way his arm was just a hair's breadth from mine. I could smell his cologne, subtle but warm, and it stirred memories I hadn't realized I still carried with me. Nate broke the silence again, his voice low and careful. I missed this, you know. I missed you. Hearing those words hit me harder than I'd expected, and I found myself looking at him, really looking, seeing the slight vulnerability in his expression that he was trying so hard to hide. I missed you too, I replied, unable to keep the honesty from my voice. We both went quiet, and in that silence I felt something shift. It was as if a wall we'd both kept up for years was starting to crumble, leaving us exposed in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand brushing his, fingers lingering just a moment too long. His eyes met mine, and I saw the same look of hesitation, of unspoken desire that I was sure mirrored my own. Jamie, he whispered, his voice rough, almost hesitant. I don't know if I should. My heart was pounding, and I could barely think past the rush of emotions flooding through me. Maybe we don't need to know, I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his gaze intense and searching, as though he was trying to find some answer in my expression. And then, slowly, he leaned in, his breath warm against my cheek as he hesitated, his lips hovering just inches from mine. My heart was racing, every nerve in my body attuned to that small space between us, the quiet, charged anticipation that felt like it could either explode or dissolve at any moment. And then, as if some unspoken decision had been made, he closed the gap, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was tentative at first, filled with the caution of two people who had spent years hiding from this very moment. The kiss deepened slowly, each of us testing the waters, letting ourselves feel the weight of everything we'd left unsaid. His hand moved to the back of my neck, his fingers threading through my hair, pulling me closer as the kiss grew bolder, more certain. When we finally broke apart, breathless, his forehead rested against mine, both of us catching our breath in the charged silence. I didn't mean for that to happen, he murmured, his voice shaky but laced with a quiet intensity that made my heart pound all over again. Neither did I admitted, though even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. Part of me had been hoping for this, dreaming about it in the quiet hours of the night, even if I'd never dared to say it out loud. He pulled back slightly, his hand still resting on my neck, and looked at me, his gaze filled with a mix of longing and uncertainty. What are we doing, Jamie? I shook my head, a small, helpless smile playing at my lips. I don't know, but maybe we don't have to know right now. He seemed to consider that, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he let out a soft, almost relieved laugh. Maybe you're right. We sat there in silence, our hands still intertwined, both of us lost in the quiet intimacy of the moment. For the first time in years, I felt like we were exactly where we were meant to be, like all the years of distance and unspoken feelings had been leading us here, to this quiet corner of the bar where we could finally let go of everything holding us back. As the night wore on, we continued talking, our voices dropping to whispers, our hands brushing in subtle, lingering touches that felt both new and familiar. Each glance, each quiet laugh, only deepened the connection between us, until it felt like the rest of the world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us suspended in this fragile, beautiful moment. We left the bar together, our shoulders brushing as we walked down the dimly lit street. The city was quieter now. The usual rush of cars and crowds faded into the night, leaving just the soft hum of streetlights and the occasional distant laughter from a passing group. There was an electricity between us that felt impossible to ignore, each step filled with the tension of what we'd left unsaid. Nate walked beside me, his hands shoved into his pockets, and I could see the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. The air felt thick, charged with a quiet anticipation that made my heart race with every step. Neither of us spoke as we approached my building, but the silence was comfortable, almost sacred. As we reached the door, I hesitated, glancing at him, my mind racing with 100 things I wanted to say but couldn't find the words for. He looked back at me, his eyes searching mine, and in that moment I saw the same longing, the same questions reflected in his gaze. "Do you want to come up?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though I knew he could hear the tremor in it. For a moment he didn't respond, his gaze fixed on mine, as if he was weighing the decision. Then he nodded, a small, almost shy smile crossing his face. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'd like that." We stepped into the elevator, the silence between us growing heavier with each floor. I could feel my heart pounding, the tension building with every second, every stolen glance. When the doors opened, I led him down the hall to my apartment, my hands shaking slightly as I unlocked the door. Inside, the quiet was almost overwhelming, the reality of being alone with him settling over us. He stood in the entryway, looking around, taking in the small details of my life that he'd missed out on over the years. I watched him, unable to tear my gaze away, every fiber of me attuned to his presence. He turned to me, his eyes meeting mine, and in that moment, everything else faded away. He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair away from my face, his touch lingering as his fingers traced along my jawline. I felt my breath hitch, my pulse racing as I leaned into his touch, letting myself feel the weight of his hand, the warmth of his skin. "Jamie," he murmured, his voice rough, filled with a quiet intensity that sent a thrill through me. I looked up at him, my own gaze steady, though my heart was pounding so loudly I could barely think. "We don't have to know what this is," I whispered, echoing the words I'd said earlier. "We just have to be here." A faint smile tugged at his lips, and then he closed the distance between us, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that was both tender and fierce, filled with the longing and desire we'd both kept hidden for so long. His hands found their way to my waist, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened, our breaths mingling in the quiet of the room. I felt his fingers slide up my back, his touch sending shivers down my spine as he held me close, our bodies pressed together, every inch of him warm and solid against me. I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him even closer, letting myself get lost in the feel of him, in the quiet intensity of his embrace. We stumbled back toward the couch, neither of us willing to break the kiss, our hands exploring, searching, as if trying to make up for all the years we'd spent apart. The weight of his body against mine, the warmth of his skin, the softness of his lips. It was all-consuming, a quiet desperation that neither of us could resist. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, his forehead rested against mine, both of us catching our breath in the silence. His hands were still on my waist, holding me close, as if he was afraid to let go. I don't know what happens after this," he whispered, his voice filled with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. I reached up, brushing my fingers along his cheek, my touch gentle, reassuring. "We'll figure it out," I replied softly. "Together." He looked at me, his gaze filled with a quiet gratitude, and in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges we faced, we'd face them side by side. We stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the quiet of the room settle over us. The weight of the moment felt profound, as if we'd crossed into uncharted territory that neither of us wanted to leave. Nate's fingers traced small, soothing patterns along my back, his touch both comforting and exhilarating. Every part of me felt alive, heightened, aware of him in a way that defied explanation. After a while, he shifted slightly, pulling me closer, our foreheads resting against each other. I didn't know it was possible to feel this way, he murmured, his voice soft but filled with emotion. Like something's been missing all this time, and now it's finally here. His words struck a chord in me, resonating with a truth I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Me too, I whispered, my fingers brushing along his jaw. I didn't realize how much I'd been waiting for this. For you. A comfortable silence settled over us, and I found myself lost in the depths of his gaze. There was something raw, almost vulnerable in his expression, a look I'd rarely seen in him, but that felt all too familiar. It was as if he was letting me see the parts of him he usually kept hidden, the quiet fears and hopes that had been buried beneath the surface. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, and I could feel the weight of his question, the uncertainty and fear mingling with the hope that lay beneath. I reached up, cupping his face in my hands, my thumbs brushing gently along his cheekbones. "We keep going," I replied, my voice steady but laced with a quiet resolve. "One step at a time. We don't need all the answers right now." He nodded, his gaze softening as he leaned into my touch. "I'm not used to letting myself feel this way," he admitted, his tone tinged with vulnerability. "But with you, it feels right." Hearing him say that made my chest tighten, a mixture of relief and joy flooding through me. I held him close, letting him know without words that he didn't have to face this alone, that whatever we felt, whatever fears we had, we'd face them together. As the hours passed, we talked about everything and nothing, our voices dropping to quiet whispers, our touches growing more comfortable, more familiar. Every laugh, every glance, every shared memory only deepened the connection between us, until it felt as if we'd known each other like this forever. Eventually, the reality of the night began to settle in, a quiet reminder that this moment, as perfect as it was, existed in a fragile space between the lives we'd built separately and the life we were just beginning to imagine together. He let out a soft sigh, his fingers playing with a strand of my hair. "I wish this didn't have to end," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I felt a pang in my chest, an ache I hadn't expected, and I reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "It doesn't," I replied, my voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll find a way to make this work. We've come this far. We're not letting go now." A faint smile tugged at his lips and he leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. "I don't deserve you, you know that?" I shook my head, my own smile matching his as I brushed my thumb along the back of his hand. Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's just about finally letting ourselves have what we've been wanting all along. In that moment, the weight of our past, our friendship, and everything that had brought us here felt like a gift, something fragile yet resilient, a reminder that sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you least expect it. As dawn began to break, casting a soft, golden light through the window, we lay there, content in the quiet warmth of each other's arms, both of us knowing that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The first light of morning seeped through the blinds, casting a soft glow over the room, but neither of us moved. The world outside felt distant, irrelevant compared to the warmth and comfort we'd found in each other. Nate's fingers traced slow, lazy patterns along my arm, his touch grounding me, keeping me anchored to this moment that I wanted to stretch on forever. Eventually, though, the reality of the day began to seep into my mind. We couldn't stay here in this bubble indefinitely. Life would pull us back into its orbit. The thought made my heart tighten with a strange mix of fear. Nate seemed to sense it, his hand slowing as he looked at me, his gaze filled with that quiet intensity I'd come to recognize. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice gentle but concerned. I nodded, managing a small smile. "Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of this," I admitted, my voice wavering slightly. He leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead, and his touch sent a reassuring warmth through me. "I get it," he murmured. "It's a lot to take in. But I'm here. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." His words settled over me like a blanket, easing some of the tension I hadn't realized I was holding. I took a deep breath, letting myself absorb the reality of his presence, of the quiet certainty in his gaze. "I don't want to lose this, Nate," I whispered, my fingers finding their way to his, lacing together as if to physically anchor us to this moment. "You won't," he replied, his voice filled with a quiet confidence that I found myself clinging to. "We didn't come all this way just to give up now." The morning drifted on, each minute slipping by in comfortable silence, both of us savoring the simplicity of being together. But as the sun climbed higher, the reality of the outside world began to intrude, and I knew that our quiet sanctuary wouldn't last forever. After a long, shared silence, Nate finally spoke, his voice laced with a bittersweet note. "I should probably head back to my place, get my things in order." I nodded, though I felt a pang at the thought of him leaving, even if it was only temporary. "Right," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Real life calls." He chuckled softly, reaching up to brush a thumb along my cheek. "Yeah, but this isn't the end. Not even close." He stood, pulling me into one last embrace, and I let myself melt into him, absorbing the quiet strength of his presence. When he finally pulled away, his gaze lingered on mine, a silent promise passing between us that neither of us needed to put into words. As he walked out the door, I felt the absence of his warmth settle over me, but beneath it was a quiet sense of resolve. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever questions remained unanswered, we'd face them together. And that was enough. The day felt strangely empty after he left, the silence of my apartment amplifying the lingering emotions from the night before. Every detail seemed to bring back flashes of the time we'd shared, his laugh echoing in my mind, the warmth of his touch, the intensity in his gaze that had spoken louder than any words. I went about my usual routine, but everything felt different, like I was moving through a world that didn't quite fit anymore. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that things would settle, that maybe this change wouldn't be as overwhelming once the excitement had passed. But deep down, I knew this wasn't something that would fade so easily. In the evening, I finally received a message from Nate. "Drinks at ours?" The simplicity of his text brought a smile to my face. Despite everything, he was still Nate, the same guy who'd always had a knack for making complicated things feel straightforward. Without hesitation, I grabbed my coat and headed to the bar where we'd reconnected just the night before. When I arrived, I found him waiting in a secluded booth at the back, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. He looked more relaxed than he had that morning, his smile easy and genuine, and seeing him there, like this, brought a flood of emotions rushing back. "Hey, you," he said softly as I slid into the seat across from him. There was a tenderness in his voice that made my chest tighten. "Hey," I replied, a warmth spreading through me as our eyes met. We ordered drinks, and the conversation flowed as naturally as ever, but there was an undercurrent to everything now, a subtle shift that made even the smallest touches and glances feel charged with meaning. It was like we were both silently acknowledging that the connection we'd shared hadn't ended when he walked out that morning. If anything, it had only deepened. At one point, as we sat in comfortable silence, he reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. His touch was gentle, his fingers tracing idle patterns along my skin. I could feel my pulse quicken, my heart beating faster as I looked at him, the weight of the unspoken between us hanging in the air. "I've been thinking," he said softly, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that left me breathless. "About us. About what this means." I swallowed, my hand tightening around his, grounding myself in the warmth of his touch. "Me too. It's overwhelming, honestly." He nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I don't know what the future holds, Jamie, but I know I don't want to walk away from this. From us." Hearing him say those words out loud felt like a weight lifting from my chest, a quiet reassurance that we were both willing to face the uncertainty together. "Neither do I," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. "I want this, whatever it turns out to be." We sat there, hand in hand, each of us silently acknowledging the magnitude of the decision we'd made. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, but as I looked at him, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Later, as we left the bar, he walked beside me, his hand brushing mine in a quiet, familiar gesture that felt as natural as breathing. We didn't say much, both of us content to simply be in each other's presence, letting the night stretch out around us like a promise. When we reached my building, he hesitated, his gaze flickering between me and the door. There was a quiet vulnerability in his expression, a softness that spoke to the depth of everything he was feeling. "Can I come up?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, a warmth flooding through me as I led him inside. The silence between us was filled with anticipation, each step echoing with the weight of what we both knew was coming. Inside my apartment, he reached for me, his hands gentle as they found their way to my shoulders, pulling me close. Our breaths mingled, and for a moment we simply stood there, holding each other in the quiet of the room, letting the world fade away. His lips brushed mine, soft and tentative, and I felt a thrill run through me as I kissed him back, letting myself get lost in the warmth and familiarity of his touch. Our kisses deepened, filled with all the emotions we'd been holding back, each one more intense than the last as we gave in to the feelings we could no longer ignore. When we finally pulled back, breathless and tangled together, the silence between us felt heavier than ever, filled with the weight of everything we'd shared and everything still left unsaid. He looked at me, his gaze soft but filled with a quiet determination. "No matter what happens, Jamie, I'm not letting this go," he murmured, his fingers brushing along my cheek in a tender, reassuring gesture. I nodded, my own voice thick with emotion. "Me neither." We stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, savoring the warmth and comfort of the moment. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that we would face them together, side by side. We spent the rest of the night wrapped in each other's arms, letting the quiet intimacy settle over us like a promise. Every whispered word, every gentle touch seemed to solidify the unspoken understanding between us. In that space, all the fears and uncertainties melted away, leaving only the feeling of finally being exactly where we belonged. As dawn broke, the first light filtering through the window, we lay there, our hands intertwined, both of us reluctant to let go of the fragile sanctuary we'd created. But as the light grew stronger, reality began to seep back in, the understanding that the outside world, with all its complications and expectations, was waiting. Nate stirred beside me, his fingers tracing a soft line down my arm, grounding me in the moment. "Last night," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It felt like everything we should have had all those years ago." His gaze met mine, and I saw the vulnerability there, a flicker of something raw and unguarded. I nodded, a bittersweet ache settling in my chest. "Yeah, it did." He took a deep breath, his hand tightening around mine. "But now, what happens next?" There was a tension in his voice, a quiet fear that mirrored my own. He was asking the question that had hung over us all night, the question neither of us wanted to face. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "But I want to try. To make this work. Whatever that looks like." A faint smile crossed his lips and he reached up, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "Me too," he said softly. "I don't want to walk away from this. From us." We shared a quiet moment, the weight of our decision settling around us, a silent agreement that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that there would be moments of doubt and fear, but as I looked into his eyes, I felt a quiet certainty that we were worth the risk. Slowly, we pulled apart, the reality of the day urging us back into our separate lives. We dressed in silence, stealing glances, small touches that spoke of the night we'd shared. When we reached the door, he turned to me, his hand lingering on the doorknob. "Jamie, no matter what happens, I don't regret this. Not a single moment." I swallowed, feeling the intensity of his words settle deep within me. "Neither do I." He leaned in, pressing one last, lingering kiss to my forehead, and I closed my eyes, savoring the warmth of his touch, the quiet promise in his embrace. And then, with one last look, he was gone, leaving a bittersweet ache in his wake. As I stood there, the apartment empty and quiet once more, I felt the weight of what we'd shared settle over me. The night we'd spent together had been everything I'd dreamed of and more, a chance to finally embrace the feelings we'd both buried for so long. But as much as it had brought us together, it had also opened a new chapter, one filled with questions and uncertainties that neither of us knew how to answer. Days passed, and we kept in touch, our messages filled with quiet reassurances, plans to see each other again, and the occasional admission of just how much that night had meant. But there was a tension between us, a quiet fear that lingered beneath the surface, the understanding that our connection was fragile, vulnerable to the pressures of the lives we'd built separately. Yet, through it all, I held on to the memory of that night, the warmth of his touch, the intensity of his gaze, the quiet certainty in his voice when he'd told me he didn't want to let go, and I knew that no matter what happened, that memory would remain, a reminder of the risk we'd taken, the vulnerability we'd embraced. And so, as the weeks turned into months, we found ourselves navigating the delicate balance of our relationship, each of us holding on to the promise we'd made that morning. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments of doubt, moments when the distance felt too great, when the silence grew too heavy. But in the quiet moments, in the small spaces between our lives, we found each other, reminding ourselves that sometimes the most fragile connections are also the most profound. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.